It was a cold winter morning in the busy streets of New York City. Snow covered the sidewalks and people hurried to their destinations, wrapped in thick coats and scarves. Among them was a young man named Jake, carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and his worries in the other. Jake had been struggling for months. After losing his job, he found it hard to make ends meet. His dreams of becoming a musician felt farther away than ever. Every day was a battle, but today felt particularly heavy. As Jake walked home, he noticed an elderly woman standing near a bench. She was shivering, her hands clutching a thin shawl around her shoulders. Jake hesitated. He didn't have much to give, but something inside him couldn't ignore her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, her eyes tired but kind. "I'm just waiting for the bus," she replied. "But it's so cold and I forgot my gloves." Without thinking, Jake took off his own gloves and handed them to her. "You need these more than I do," he said with a smile. The woman's eyes widened. "But what about you?" "I'll be fine," Jake assured her. The woman, whose name was Mrs. Harper, watched Jake walk away, his hands now bare in the freezing cold. She was deeply moved by his kindness. Later that day, as Mrs. Harper sat in her small apartment, she thought about how one simple act had warmed not just her hands, but her heart. She decided to do something kind in return. The next morning, Mrs. Harper made a batch of cookies and delivered them to the local homeless shelter. She also donated a few blankets she no longer used.
At the shelter, a volunteer named Sarah was inspired by Mrs. Harper's gesture. Sarah had always wanted to do more for the community, but her busy life kept her from acting. That evening, she shared Mrs. Harper's story with her friends and encouraged them to join her in organizing a winter clothing drive. Word spread quickly, and within days, dozens of people in the neighborhood began donating coats, scarves, and gloves. Meanwhile, Jake continued his daily struggles. Despite his challenges, he still made time for small acts of kindness, helping a neighbor carry groceries, holding the door open for strangers, and playing his guitar at the local park to brighten people's days. One afternoon, while playing his guitar in the park, Jake noticed a small crowd gathering. Among them was Sarah, the volunteer from the shelter. She had heard about Jake through a mutual friend and wanted to thank him for inspiring Mrs. Harper, which in turn inspired her. "You don't know this," Sarah said, "but your small act of kindness has created something incredible. We've started a community project to help those in need." Jake was surprised and humbled. "I didn't do much," he said. Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the smallest acts make the biggest difference." A man in the crowd approached Jake after hearing his story and his music. "I'm a music producer," the man said. "Would you like to record some songs with us?" Jake couldn't believe it. His dream of becoming a musician, which had seemed impossible just weeks ago, was suddenly within reach. As weeks turned into months, Jake's music career began to take off. He never forgot how a single act of kindness had changed his life. To give back, he started a foundation to support struggling artists and homeless individuals, providing them with resources and opportunities to pursue their dreams. Mrs. Harper continued her acts of kindness, inspiring her neighbors to do the same. Sarah's winter clothing drive became an annual event, growing larger every year. Jake's story became a reminder to everyone who heard it. One small act of kindness can create a ripple effect, touching lives in ways we may never imagine. In the end, it wasn't just about giving gloves to an elderly woman or helping a neighbor. It was about the power of human connection and the belief that even in the hardest times, kindness can bring hope and light. And so the ripple continued, changing lives one act at a time.